What's up guys, Asian here again with another sort of theory crafting video, kind of a build video. It's kind of a combination of both. So I've actually kind of been sitting on this video for quite a while debating whether to release it or not, mainly because the topic at hand, as you can tell from the title, is something that is definitely very controversial among the greater ESO population. And when I say the greater ESO population, I'm not talking about the endgame community necessarily. I'm talking about basically everybody who plays ESO. Role players, casual players, solo players, endgame players, sort of progression, vet guilds, basically everybody who plays ESO. This is a very, very controversial topic in that whenever it's brought up, whether it's on the forums, on the official Reddit, I should say official forums or the Reddit or any of the discords like the class rep discords, for example, there's always a lot of very, very strong opinions from many different sides. So I thought that I will throw my hat into this ring here and kind of dispel a couple of myths, kind of clear up a lot of misconceptions, and basically give you guys the truth, or I don't want to say the truth, but give you guys basically as objective of a viewpoint as I can possibly make it. Obviously, I do have a biased viewpoint. I am an endgame trials runner. The trials that I run are always going to be at the highest level. You know, Hellfire Dominion is on the process of progressing through Cloud Rest hard mode. Mayflower has gone through Griffin progression. We've cleared basically all the vet trials in the game on hard mode. We may not necessarily be running for score or anything, but we do try our best to basically optimize our group as best as we can given who we have available. We're obviously not going to tell our groups to basically say, hey, you have to run Stamina Nightblade because they're the highest DPS. We're not going to tell them, hey, you have to run this set and that set, but at the same time, all of us are very aware of what the meta is, and we are constantly adapting and changing our builds, our strategies, to kind of fit that sort of mechanic. So I do come into this with a very biased viewpoint, so do keep this in mind. I'm not going to say that I am taking the neutral ground here. I am a human. I have opinions. Some of these opinions are very strong, and that's just a matter of where I come from. So as you guys can tell from the title, this particular topic is DPS. Is it possible to do bad DPS? Is it possible to do good DPS? What causes, what is responsible for that gap between the very best players versus the sort of middle ground players versus the mediocre players versus the really, really bad players? And for a lot of endgame raiders, it kind of boils down to your rotation. And I've kind of emphasized this a lot on my build videos in the past, and a couple of theory crafting videos, that a very large portion of your DPS does not come from gear. It does not necessarily come from champion points. It comes a lot from the execution of your rotation. If you're not able to execute your rotation very well, then your DPS is going to suffer as a result. Of course, I have released a few builds that have tried to sort of meet that middle ground where the rotation is simple, but it's still capable of pulling very good DPS. That's one of the main complaints that I've seen from a lot of people who want to get into sort of vet dungeons, vet trials kind of thing. These builds, these rotations are too complex. And I have shown through a few build videos, particularly the Magic heavy attack build video, that rotations don't have to be complex. You still need to have a rotation, but even a simple rotation like that heavy attack Sork build, or even that 1-bar Sork build, can provide enough DPS to clear a lot of the content in the game, 95% of the content in the game. Obviously, if you want to do something like Maw hard mode, Halls hard mode, Cloud Rest hard mode, the very, very high, very, very end game stuff, you will eventually have to, do a light attack rotation. But that, heavy attack Sork build, easily you can clear VHOF, you can clear VMAW, you can clear Asylum +1 at the very least, maybe not Asylum +2, but it just kind of shows that rotations don't necessarily have to be difficult, but you still have to execute the rotation properly if you want to basically maximize your overall DPS. And the one bar pet sork build that I released a few days ago, I think is sort of really emphasizes that. I went to that build with a lot of assumptions, assuming that you only have access to the base game. You can either only use crafted sets or sets you can buy off guild traders, or base game dungeon monster helm sets. So this was basically sort of like the bare bones, sort of bare minimum. Now, another kind of thing that I've heard a lot of people say is, well, you're max CP, I'm not max CP. And Code has kind of gone over this a lot on the forums. He is a very strong proponent of the idea that champion points themselves are not a primary source of the power creep that we're seeing here, and I am firmly in that camp as well. I have done a video in the past exploring how CP affects DPS, and I basically came to the conclusion that the gap between CP 160 and max CP is very, very large. I should say not very large, but it is definitely very noticeable. And part of that is because at CP 160 you don't have your max stats. If you take a look at CP 300 versus the max CP right now, CP 810, or back when I did the video it was CP 750 was the cap, you'll see that yes, there is definitely a gap there, but it starts to shrink a lot. Remember that when CP was first introduced, the CP cap was, I believe, 501 or somewhere around there. So to really take a look at CP, the power creep from CP, you'd have to take a look at from CP 500 all the way up to CP 810, and we'll find that yes, there is a noticeable increase with every single iteration, every 30 CP. Yes, you do end up getting more DPS, but that's not really where the power creep comes from. From that old video, if I remember correctly, the difference between CP 600 and CP 750 was around 10 to 13% or so. And if you take that into consideration, that's 150 CP, so 5 patches. In this current sort of patch iteration, that's the equivalent of about a year. 5 quarters, 4 quarters in a year, it's a little bit over a year. So in the course of a year, CP contributed only an additional 10 to 15% of our DPS. If we were originally hitting 40% at CP 40k at CP 600, at CP 750, we'd only be hitting around 44k. That is a noticeable increase, but it is not primarily responsible for the power creep. So that's another thing that a lot of people have argued on the forums. All these builds are made with max CP. They're just assuming you have max CP. Clearly, if I'm not running, if I'm not running a CP 300 or a CP 160 build, that's where I should actually be doing. And I do recognize that not everybody who watches my build videos are max CP, are really kind of at that level. But if I could, in theory, release whole bunches of different optimized CPs for various CP levels. But the question is, at what point is it too much information? Do I do one CP 160, 300, 450, 600, 750, 810? Do I just do CP 300 and CP 810 like Alcast does on his website, on his builds? Do I do CP 160, 300, 810? Where is that sort of middle ground? Because every time I do that, I would have to do a parse. I would have to take a look at the Constellations add-on and use that to kind of basically optimize my CP and play around with kind of what I have available to me. So basically what I'm saying is CP power creep, they are related. I'm not saying that CP is not a component of power creep, but to say that CP is a very, very large contributor to power creep, that's a little bit of a misconception. And I've already done a video kind of explaining that back, this would be about 3 patches ago. So back when the CP cap was 750. So, it all boils back down to people really need to master their rotations in order to do good DPS. And again, like I kind of showcased with the heavy attack Sork build and with the 1-bar Sork build, doesn't have to be a very complex rotation to pull good DPS. Now, one of the things I've seen on the official forums very often from sort of endgame players is that you can easily pull 15k DPS as long as you have relevant gear, as long as you have a good rotation or some semblance of a rotation. And a lot of people say, no, you can't. Not at CP 160. You cannot pull 15k DPS at CP 160. And here is the reality of it. This is a parse that I did just now on a 6 million dummy, assuming I am at CP 160. So here's all the information here. You can see here I am not at CP cap here. I did not put all 110 CPs in. I only put in enough CPs to mimic as though I had 160 CPs. And here's the gear that I used. This is a 1 bar pet build, so just ignore the fact that I have Maelstrom Bow here. And yes, a lot of this stuff is gold, but I've already kind of done videos showing that golding out armor doesn't really contribute that much. So the difference between gold Mother Sorrow versus purple Mother Sorrow is very small. So, you know, it might end up being maybe like another 500 DPS or so. Not that big of a deal if I had all purple stuff. Obviously, you're going to want to have gold weapon, so even if all this armor stuff was purple, I'd probably still be hitting very close to the damage that I did here. So you can see here, Mother Sorrow, easy set to get. It's purchasable off guild traders. Julianos, crafted set. If you can't craft it yourself, you can usually get somebody to craft it for you. I have the jewelry here, but again, you can swap these out however you'd like. I didn't even use a monster helm set. I used 2-piece Torx pack that gives me additional 129 spell damage here. So you can see here, all this gear is very, very easily obtainable for somebody who is at CP 160. Sure, it might cost you a little bit of money, but money in ESO is actually fairly easy to come by as long as you kind of have an inkling of what sells well. You know, motifs sell pretty decently. You know, if you're doing your crafting grits every day, you get some good money out of that. If you're selling your resources, you get some very good money out of that. And again, going back to the peak parse, 17.6k, it's very respectable. And there are people out there who are saying you can't pull this sort of DPS at CP 160 without, you know, using Sororia or Spell Strategist, or using the meta sets or anything like that, or yeah, I need to be CP 300 in order to do this. And this is not the case here. And you can see here, just from the amount of abilities I used, I basically only used 3 abilities. Everything else was just heavy attacks. Liquid Lightning, Blockade of Storms. I had the Atronac, and then I had my pet out, my Twilight Matriarch, who just sits there. You don't have to do anything with the Matriarch at all. So the sort of idea that high DPS is unattainable for people is an idea that I think is complete, you know, pardon my language here, but it's complete bullshit. Everybody is capable of pulling, at the very least, 15k DPS. That is something that I very, very strongly believe in. And again, this is a 1 bar build. I didn't use my back bar, so I am missing out on 5 active abilities. And I've already shown with the heavy attack build, you know, at max CP, I'm pulling 43, 44k self-buffed on a dummy. And if I were to drop down to maybe a CP 300, sure, I might pull maybe, you know, 36, 35k or so, but that's still plenty of DPS. That's still enough to get you through the Vet Craglorn. That's enough to get you through VMAW. It's enough to get you through Asylum and Cloud Arrest, +1 perhaps. So this whole idea that high DPS is unattainable by all but 1% of the ESO population, I think is a completely dumb idea. It is a completely crap idea, and it is one that is not firmly grounded in reality, and that is everybody can achieve this level of DPS. Again, this was all with crafted gear or gear you can buy off of guild traders. This is a 1 bar setup, so I'm not even using my back bar, so this is perfectly fine for people with high ping. This is a Magicka build, so you can have your shield there, so you don't have to, you know, worry about not having a shield at all. I didn't even use potions here, so I used Power Surge instead for my Major Sorcery instead. So I'm not even using potions here, so I'm missing out on Major Prophecy, which would have increased my DPS even further. So this whole idea that high DPS is reserved for only the top 1% of the ESO population, I think is a complete fantasy. It just doesn't reflect reality. And the reality is, you can pull good DPS regardless of your CP levels. Obviously, you know, I'm not going to test things out at CP 10. At that point, you should still be trying to get up to CP 160, so you get up to the gear cap, so that way you can actually start using gear, farming for gear, crafting gear, things like that. So CP 160 would be the bare minimum CP I would try to basically make builds for or test builds out on. But again, 1 bar, heavy attack Sorc, so all I'm doing is holding down my left mouse button. I'm using 2 active abilities. I'm using my ultimate, my Storm Atronac on cooldown, and I'm still able to pull above 15k DPS. And this is plenty for vet dungeons. Pretty much everything base game, except for perhaps the Vet Craglorn crowds. This is plenty of DPS to cover pretty much all the base game vet dungeons, including hard modes. Perhaps it's a little bit under. I probably wouldn't necessarily run City of Ash 2 with this, just because City of Ash 2 is definitely probably, I'd probably want to try to hit at least 20k before I go for City of Ash 2. But everything else, this is perfectly fine DPS. So kind of the secret behind DPS is, again, just mastering your rotation, having some semblance of a rotation. And people always say, well, what about, you can't just dummy hump the whole time. You got to play mechanics in a real fight. And I'm saying, yes, that is legitimate criticism, that these are dummy parses. These are idealized parses. You're not have to play mechanics or anything like that. But I would argue that learning the fight is also a part of being a good DPS. And as you guys might have seen from videos from other streamers who main DPS, I don't really DPS that often anymore, people are very clearly able to pull very good DPS while playing fight mechanics. Fight mechanics are things that you can learn. They are not this some sort of magical brick wall that you must always hit every time you run that fight. Mechanics are something that you can learn and you can work your way around. You can learn strategies. You can watch videos of people running these dungeons or these trials. You can ask your group members for any sort of advice. You can observe what the mechanics are and basically work your way around those mechanics. So people who say, oh, this is not accurate DPS because you have to play mechanics in a real fight, I would argue that mechanics are something that you're able to learn. It is an obstacle that you are able to overcome with practice, with diligence, and with discipline. The people who, in my opinion, the people who say that I cannot achieve good DPS because I am not CP cap, I do not have the best gear in the game, I keep dying to mechanics, my healer sucks, my tank sucks, those are all piss poor excuses for the real issue at hand, which is you do not have the discipline, you do not have the sort of mindset required to really sit down, practice your rotation, and pay attention to mechanics. To me, those excuses are just that. They're excuses. They do not actually represent the problem that is actually holding that person back from doing good DPS. And to me, the two biggest issues I see when I help people out with low DPS is you're not really working on your rotation as much as you should, and you're not learning from your mistakes from these fights. You're not learning the mechanics, you're not learning your rotation, and that's what's dragging you down. Not the fact that you are CP 628, it's not the fact that you don't have Sororia, it's not the fact that you don't have max CP, it's not the fact that your healers aren't using combat prayer, it's just the fact that you aren't practicing enough, you're not disciplined, you're not, at that point where you're basically not doing the homework. It's just what it all boils down to. And I know this is something that really pisses off a lot of people, especially casual players, but that's just the reality of it. I was also somebody who was a casual player. I used to just solo quest the whole time. I didn't follow any builds. I didn't use any 5-piece sets. And now here I am, clearing all the hardest content in the game. So, everybody thinks that mechanically challenged Hodor, they all went into the game and we're immediately at the top. That's not the case. We all started at the bottom and we all worked our way up. The question is, are other people willing to work their way up just like we have? And believe me, we want to see people work. We want to help people get to that level. There's nothing that brings us more joy, more happiness than seeing other people complete vet content, see other people get excited to do vet content. But it is not a one-way street. I've seen a lot of people say, help me with my DPS. I need to help with my DPS. And I'm like, well, there's only so much that I can do to help you. There's only so much that I can do to help your team. You guys also have to do the work. It's a two-way street. So you guys have to be able to put in the effort to practice your rotation on a dummy to learn the mechanics of the fight. So I know this whole video has pretty much been just rambling this whole time, but I think it kind of teaches people a good lesson that that high DPS is not unattainable. It is, in my opinion, very attainable for everybody in the game. You just have to be able to put in the effort to get to that level. So yeah, a bit of a kind of a rant here, a little bit of a speech, and I know this is a very controversial topic, and I know that some people are going to be very angry at me, and I know that I probably did not make myself any friends with this video, but I felt like this is definitely an issue that I needed to get off my chest, that I felt like I needed to communicate to the greater ESO community, and to basically sort of correct all this misinformation, to dispel all these myths that I've been seeing on the forums, on Reddit, this whole idea that I can't achieve this DPS because I keep making all these excuses. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. So that's gonna be it for me here, and hope you guys enjoyed the video, or at the very least learned something from this, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.